that was a real effort by Dr. Barr at that time. More recently, a multi-specialty group was brought together, all people that do augmentation, and using the ISMAR RAND approach, or the UCLA RAND approach, working with a company called ISMAR, and again, I was involved in this research. This group of 11 experts really downplayed the relevance of time, feeling that, again, situations should be thought about in terms of failures of other points rather than specifically time. So I think this is a very hot topic and important discussion, really one that I think consensus has been driving towards. We should think about this for a number of years. So with those introductory comments, Greg, do we have anybody in the queue?
Yeah, we do. And before we get to that, though, I would say that I misspoke when I defined acute as less than 3. That's the sort of hyperacute that you were talking about, which does seem to be the focus. And I know in the vapor, I think they emphasized to some extent the hyperacute population. But definitionally, I think acute is still defined as anything less than 6 weeks. And as far as the definition of a failed non-surgical management, question 12 does get to that. And just to read that, 12, again, we'll wait till later to answer these, but that says, how confident are you that there is sufficient published evidence that each of the below is a reliable, valid, and meaningful indicator of failed non-surgical management? And then each to be individually scored: pain precluding ambulation, pain precluding physical therapy, unacceptable side effects from non-surgical management, progression of vertebral height loss, persistence of at least moderate pain, and worsening kyphosis. And many of those were derived from society comments, what they recommended to be, how those should be defined. I think we added several when we were developing the questions. We put these out to some subject matter experts to look at and suggest changes or additions. So, but yeah, I think that we have 4 in our queue now. Operator, can we get to the first question or comment? Operator?
Your next question, line of Nelson Watts.
Yes, hello. This is Nelson Watts. I'm an endocrinologist, osteoporosis person in Cincinnati, Ohio. I represent the Endocrine Society, have no relevant conflicts of interest. Also a member of the American Society for Bone and Mineral Research, whose task force report was quoted earlier as showing no benefit to vertebroplasty. This is an opportunity to highlight the heterogeneity of 2 sides of the question. And the first question is, or issue is, if these procedures reduce pain, what is the mechanism? And one could be stabilization of the fracture, but the cement creates an exothermic reaction as it cures, so it could be heat. But fractures are different. Where's the location? Is it a mild fracture, severe fracture? Is there a cleft? Timing is important. And the procedures themselves sound like they're the same, but vertebroplasty in one hand is not the same as vertebroplasty in someone else's hand. How much cement is put in, what type of cement. And I was thinking, what would happen if I had a painful vertebral fracture and someone asked me to be in a sham-controlled trial and said, if you don't participate in the trial, we can go ahead and do the procedure anyway. I'm concerned that there's a selection bias for patients who may be less severely affected who would say yes to participation in a trial. So as important as these numeric endpoints are, I would argue that it's unless you have much more homogeneity in defining what type and other parameters of the fracture, and much more consistency in how the procedures are performed, that we're not nearly as smart as we think we are. That's my comment.
Thank you.
Nelson, I want to just thank you. That's a really terrific comment highlighting several different important points. It is very hard to achieve a homogeneous population in any of these trials, and I do think that that has been a challenge as we've tried to do some of these. That amongst the many other excellent points you made. Thank you. I didn't mean to jump.
Operator, we can get to the next comment.
Your next question line of Dr. John Barr.
Is my line open now?
Yes.
Good. Hi, I am an interventional neuroradiologist who practices at UT Southwestern in Dallas, and I'm a former president of the American Society of Spine Radiology, who I represent today. I think all of these comments are great, but there are two fundamental issues that we really haven't discussed. One which is with regard to a waiting period, that this would essentially be the only bone in the body that we consider a trial of doing nothing rather than fixation for a fracture. And the other is the issue of safety of this procedure. That has been questioned by some, that this might not be safe or we don't know how safe it is. And I would challenge that, in fact, now with 15 reported randomized trials, we know precisely how safe this is. From a recent presentation I gave at a meeting, there are 1,098 patients who were treated with augmentation in the 15 trials. Of those nearly 1,100 patients, there are 16 reported procedural complications. That's 1.5%. And of those complications, many are trivial. There are only 2 patients that had significant complications, one with osteomyelitis, one with a respiratory arrest from sedation, which is a 0.18% serious adverse event rate, and the mortality in these 1,098 augmented patients is 0 from the procedure. So I think we have absolute ironclad data that this is an extremely safe procedure. You know, how did we get to the question of waiting? In the beginning, when we started doing this, and I've been doing this now for 25 years, we didn't know how safe it was. It was a very novel procedure, so we tended to only treat patients who had exhausted all other traditionally accepted therapies. As we understood how safe this was and became confident, we started treating patients earlier and earlier. I will also add from personal experience, both of my parents have had osteoporotic vertebral compression fractures for a total of 4 between them. Every single one of those fractures was treated within 48 hours of identification. Thank you.
Dr. Barr, were they particularly symptomatic?
Yes, they're in severe pain.
Were they hospitalized?
Actually, yes, my mother was hospitalized.
Okay.
I will also speak to the lack of clinical follow-up in some of the trials. My mother had an initial excellent response that lasted about 72 hours. Then she told me her pain had returned almost to baseline. I knew instantly what she had. She had a new fracture. But some of the negative trials that we placed stock in had absolutely no clinical follow-up. So when those patients did poorly, who knows what happened to them? And all of us who do this know that having new fractures is extremely common.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. Dr. Hirsch, do you have any follow-up there you want to say?
I think that, Dr. Barr, his paper is in the bibliography, and the bibliography did make efforts to include lots of different papers with different perspectives. I think that one of the debates that I helped launch and lost was the question of whether or not adjacent body fractures occurred more commonly after vertebral augmentation. In the recent paper that was cited by our colleague from Endocrine, there were questions raised about whether that question has been answered.